But I do not see anything on YouTube. It says that we are live streaming, but I don't have any video. Do you? Oh, okay, here we go. Sorry, it took a while there. Hello, and welcome to the March 4th, 2022 Bitcoin Cash Network Discussion. Today's topic is upgrades in May and beyond, stability and scaling through the chip process. Today, I am joined by Jason Dreyzehner of Bitauth, John Nieri, President of General Protocols, Jonathan Silverblood, a chipper, imaginary username, and Dr. Kui Wang, lead developer of smartBCH. I am, of course, your host, Cheap Lightning. Please feel free to post questions in the chat here on YouTube or in our Telegram channel, and hopefully we'll have time to get to them at the end of today's discussion. Today, we will be discussing the upcoming updates for both BCH and smartBCH, but I think also, very importantly, we will be discussing how the chip process actually works. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about what it is and how it works, so I'm very happy that today we will be able to finally dig in and hopefully get a better understanding of how the chip process came to be and how it works. BCH is unique in that we do not have any kind of top-down structure dictating how upgrades are handled. And my understanding is that imaginary username was the person who spearheaded this initiative. Could you please tell us how this came to be and why you think it's important?
All right. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the chip process came from, if we want to really trace it back to all the way up, it came from in the very beginning. Bitcoin was just a piece of software that's written by Satoshi, and then Satoshi says whatever he wants in that software, and then it gets implemented. That was at the very beginning, and then Satoshi disappeared, and then Bitcoin became decentralized. But while Satoshi left, he did. People would argue that he left some clues in terms of how to perform an agreed upon upgrade, but there was no real process in terms of deciding what actually goes into those upgrades. And so we just to save everyone a lot of time, I wouldn't go into the details, but since then, a lot of controversies happened. There was the block size debate, which resulted in the birth of BCH itself, and then BCH itself went through a couple of different upgrades, and then there were some more chaotic ones where there were great controversies, and those great controversies resulted in a lot of confusion, and also loss of value, and greatly impacted the community. So the fundamental question there is that in a cryptocurrency network, at least in a cryptocurrency network where the coins are fungible within itself, there can only be one set of consensus rules at a time that is followed by everyone on the network. And so deciding how to upgrade this is then a crucially important thing if your network wants to stay up to date and wants to provide all the features that people want. So one of the very earliest controversial upgrades is basically, upgrading the capacity, the block size, the maximum block size of the network that resulted in the birth of BCH. And so there were a few approaches in terms of deciding which features to include. So one of the more popular ones that is pioneered quote unquote pioneered by the BTC network is basically, well, never do hard forks. So if you never do hard forks, then you don't have to worry about compatibility. And then if you only do soft forks, then you can basically pull together some miners, tell them to do this thing, and then nobody else needs to even necessarily know anything, and then you just cruise along. So that is one way to do things. The downside of that, of course, is it doesn't have wide participation, and more importantly, it greatly limits what kind of upgrades you can possibly do if you go down that path. The other path that is, I would say, even more popular among the cryptocurrency space is simply to centralize decisions. What if you have one guy or one company or one foundation to take the reins, and then they can be very responsive. They can just pick up the phone and call all the exchanges and say, okay, we are upgrading next week. Just download this piece of software and do what we say. That is another approach. The downside of that approach is that, well, you have then centralized the app. You have absolutely centralized the upgrading power. That would mean that entity gets to do whatever they want. And that is a central point of failure. And if that guy goes rogue, or just do something generally unpleasant, it can be a really bad situation. So there is also that approach, and then there's
could you quickly mention like what the bad situation means, because just really quickly, because that's a very specific thing, right? That's a split right there, what you're talking about. It's either, yeah,
right. Well, it could be split, or it could be
could
worse.
be a split, yeah.
It could be split, or it could be worse. Like, this is not just limited to BCH. Like on other chains, your decision making body could simply make the choice of selling your entire network to just Intron, and there's nothing you can do about it. And in examples that are closer to home, you could have the entity make the unilateral decision that, okay, you know what, we're reducing mining output, and then everyone would just go with it, and then the miner is like, wait a second, what the heck? And then that just happens. Or in something even closer to home, that guy could say, you know what, we're imposing a tax on all the new coin distribution, and that tax goes to me. And and then there will be a lot of chaos, because that's something obviously bad, and then it takes a very long and very exhausting, and you basically have to mount a revolution against that guy, and it is a very nasty situation that you don't want to go through. Dictatorships eventually fall, but at great cost. When they go bad, they go really, really bad. And in order to be a permissionless and reliable network, you want to minimize that kind of situations happening on your network.
Okay, so that's a lot of history about why you were inspired to create the chip process. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about how it works? So I have an idea, and I think it would be good for BCH. Now, how do I get some groundswell on that?
Right. So what happened at the beginning of this specific chip process was that we were in the aftermath of actually the aforementioned revolution against a certain guy who wanted to implement a tax on the distribution, and that guy was eventually kicked out, but at great cost. To everyone. A lot of people were upset, and a lot of people were hurt. Development was stalled. Adoption was stalled. So we then look around, and several of us got together, John included, Jonathan was kind of there too, and then several people of BCHN and beyond were also there in the beginning. We recognize that, okay, we know what we don't want. First, we don't want a centralized body to just say by decree, we want this and this should go on at a time of my choosing. This pleases me, I want this to happen. We are not going back to that model again. We are, however, BCH is also not at a point yet where we can just follow BTC's footstep and say, you know what, we are never hard forking again. Among other things, we still need to upgrade the block size. And there are smart contract things that are not finished yet. And then there are scaling improvements, namely UTXO commitments that are not there yet that's necessary for scaling. There are several things that we still need in terms of upgrading. So and they need to be developed, they need to be implemented, they need to be included in upgrades. How do we bring about this without going through another chaotic period? And so this is where the chip process was born, in that we emphasize that there should be an orderly process. That is why the chip process follows a relatively clear schedule, a relatively clear yearly schedule, where it's spelled out fairly clearly, what kind of milestones each upgrade should hit at which time point, and that the person bringing up that upgrade is responsible for pushing it. And we also spell out that all this process should take place in the open and be broadcast, and the owner of a proposal must be responsible for reaching out to stakeholders to get their opinions on a certain upgrade. And in that process, as it is transparent and follows an orderly schedule, what we hope to see that, whether a proposal is included should become clearer and clearer as the process goes on, instead of, as in the past, if you don't have a certain process, then you have a proposal and then you have several geniuses lock themselves in a smoke-filled room. They spend a couple of days agreeing among themselves, and then a month before the next upgrade, they toss it out and say, oh, this is what it is, just take it. And then people are like, wait, what the heck? And so a lot of the confusions and chaos came from that disorderly process. We don't want that, and so here we are.
So it sounds like previously developers kind of talked together in less than public channels and sort of agreed on what they were going to do, and then eventually, without reaching wider consensus, they just sort of proclaimed that is what was going to happen. Is that what I'm understanding?
It's a bit worse than that. Previously, it's basically you bring your proposal, and then you go into this little room with the king, and then the king reads the proposal and say yes or no, and then you get out of the room, and then you work on other things, and then 3 months before the next upgrade, the king throws it out, and that's what it is.
I see.
Yeah.
And I'd like to mention here that one way to see this is, many people say, like, obviously the name is kind of derived from the BIP, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal system that is still in use with BTC. But if you compare the two, you will see some of these very, very key differences, which are, one, that you have to actually communicate out in the open. You have to talk with stakeholders. This isn't a decision by developers. It's it's a decision for the network. That's a huge difference between the BIP and chip process. Like, chip is about the network, not about the development side of things. It's not a developer decision, it's a network decision. So it needs to involve the network, right? It needs to involve the players and the ecosystem and all the commerce going on in the network. So if you actually do like a comparison, if you sit down and look at the structure of the BIP in a chip, you will see those key elements that are brought out here.
One thing that was mentioned was, imagine you said 3 months before, and then all of the developers have to sort of scramble to get together and have their upgrades ready in time. It seems like stability of the network would be probably greatly harmed by that. John, I know that John, you talk a lot about stability. Could you maybe go into that a little bit as far as how you think the chip schedule works as far as creating stability for the network?
Yeah, certainly. It's not just the schedule, but the whole process, right? The schedule is an important part of it. But the whole process, the point is to have, like Uname said, have a way to reach agreements and so forth. And we found just empirically from history that if you try to leave all of this to miners, what really happens, like at the day of the split, let the miners decide on the day of the split. If you do that, the reality is that the split has already happened by that point, right? There's so much that goes on leading up to a hard fork or an upgrade or a soft fork or whatever. Like, just because it's a soft fork doesn't mean there can't be a split, like whatever leading up to an upgrade, the split has already happened. So this process is very important that people get involved and there's a shared understanding of what needs to happen and what should happen. And once you have that, then you're able to say more confidently, like, hey, this guy, this girl who has this really good idea, but it's just an idea. And they have a lot of influence, they have a loud voice, and they want this thing to happen, but they haven't actually done all the things that are needed. They haven't actually, done the homework, done the legwork to find out, what does this mean for exchanges and miners? What does it mean for all the wallets that people use? Is it going to break anything? And just the idea that you have the process there and people understand that it's there. And if you follow it, then you can generally, find out, you can discover if your idea is actually a good one or if it just sounds good. And just because you have a loud voice, it doesn't mean that the upgrade is definitely going to happen. Or just because you're in control of a certain node software, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And so once you get to that point, then the stability emerges from that, right? Where there is a shared understanding that things need to happen before anything gets taken seriously. And once you get to that stability, then a company like ours, like General Protocols, can say, okay, BCH is a stable network. It's not going to break things. They have things together, and upgrades are going to happen, but it's also going to be stable. I can probably build some business or some products on top of this. And if you don't have that, then it's just going to drive people away because they don't know what to expect. And then traders, of course, if you're a trader and you're dealing with speculating on the value of it, splits are just that's just it's very destructive to the value of the network effect and so forth. Sorry, maybe I talked too much, but yeah, the stability is very important.
No, that was very informative. Thank you. But I feel a little bit like I still don't exactly understand how to go about the process. And I think this is a perfect segue to ask Jonathan, somebody who's been successful in bringing some chips to life. So I have this amazing idea. Everybody listen to me. I have this wonderful idea. Let's make blocks 2 terabytes. Now, how do I go about making a chip for that, and how does it work? So Jonathan, please tell me, how can I make a chip? How can I get it to light?
All right. So if you want to have 2 terabyte blocks, you'll first start by figuring out what's going to happen if you get 2 terabyte blocks. And when you have a pretty good idea of what that outcome is going to be, you can start documenting it. You can write up a document that tells people, like, I think we should do this, and if we do this, I expect that to happen. That shows that you've not just come up with an idea, but you've actually considered a bit about what the implications of your idea is. The next step is to make sure that your idea is known. And so, as I already mentioned, you should try to be in the public and the open as much as you can when you have discussions about this. But that is not going to be enough, because most people who work on developing things or who are building businesses, they don't have time to go dig in the open for people's ideas. And they have businesses to build, and they have software to maintain, and so on. So when you have had some discussion and you have a good idea of what things is, and you still think it's a good thing to do, then you start need to go out and figure out who is actually going to get impacted by this. Like, which are the specific companies that are going to either be forced to make some changes, upgrade some code, or who will benefit from this. And when you know who those are, you need to compile that as part of your document and tell people that, I've identified these stakeholders. Are there any more stakeholders? Have I missed anyone? And try to cooperate with people in the ecosystem to figure out what is the actual scope. Not what you think the scope is, what is the actual scope. And then you'll have to do the very, very time-consuming work of trying to reach out to every single one of your stakeholders and give them a short explanation and reference the material and ask if they can take some time to give you some feedback. And you also need to be very clear on what your goal is. You can't just have an idea, I want to have 2 terabyte blocks. You need to have an idea that is so specific that people kind of are forced to take a decision on it. So, for example, in your case, you could set a timeline on it. You could say that I want to have it for the next upgrade. Because if you don't have that timeline, if it's just open, people think okay, so he just wants to evaluate an idea. Okay, he can do that evaluation, I'll come in later. But if you have a clear timeline and you start telling people that I've actually passed this through company A, B, and C, and I talk with developer team A, B, and C, and these people think that of it, those people think that of it, and it's generally a positive perspective, then more and more of the people who are normally busy and who wouldn't talk with you because they are busy are going to give you time, because you have shown that you're able to do that legwork and actually get connected with people. And so this is important, and this has been said many times in this chat already, but I want to raise the one more time. So this is a matter of awareness and building consensus. The goal of the SHIP process is not actually the technical side, but it's the social side. And it's really important, because if you don't have awareness, then there is going to be people with different opinions who are going to be in conflict with you, and they will not know about what's going on. And when it gets sprung on them and they are discovering it late in the process, when people have already kind of settled down and chosen their path, the tone of the discussion becomes very negative, and people why didn't you tell me earlier? And I have lots of reasons why not to do this, but it's too late now, so no one's going to listen to me, and they feel unheard. So it's really important that you have a clear timeline, to have a long-term perspective, and that you're spending a significant amount of your time actually talking with people. And identifying the stakeholders can be one of the most difficult tasks in this. It's kind of, depending on the proposal, of course, it can be fairly easy to figure out what kind of companies are involved, but actually figuring out which actual companies are involved or what actual organizations are involved, that is a really hard part.
Thank you very much. To distill this down even to the most very basic level, how does someone get involved? It sounds like if you want to be involved in this process, if you want to voice your concerns, if you want to express your ideas, you have to join the conversation. How do I join the conversation?
Right. So there are no strict rules or limits for how you do this. Any social media channel will actually work as a starting point. But if you look at what organizations and companies are usually getting impacted and therefore important to to reach out to early, they are concentrated around a handful of more Bitcoin Cash oriented channels. Bitcoin Cash Research is the forum that's usually the best starting point. But if you happen to have connections and know people in the space, then reaching out to those directly will probably be just as good a starting point to get that early feedback so that you can get something published.
So a good bouncing off point would be bitcoincashresearch.org. And you said there are some other social media channels. Is there a Telegram that people should go into to see what's going on? Or is there some other process that people can jump into?
No, not that I know of, at least, and not that I've been using. Normally, when I make my proposals, I set up specific Telegram channels, and I put links to those channels in my chip so that people who are reading the chip know where to reach me. That's probably just as important as many of the other parts. I also, if I were to start from scratch on something where I didn't have a good base to stand on, like an entirely new idea, I would probably spend some time when like Reddit and Twitter or other discussion groups like the many channels on Discord, and get some initial feedback and reactions and kind of flesh out my idea before I write it down. But yeah, there's no strict rules set here.
I'd like to address a
Sure.
point that I think may be on people's minds. So people who have been in Bitcoin for a long time, they know that conflict arises, right? And like Jonathan said, it's quite a social process, really. It's easy to start to kind of dehumanize and demonize people who disagree with you when you're too late in the process, like Jonathan said. And a big part of what this does is it surfaces all these issues and discussions much, much earlier. I mean, we're talking like a year ahead of time, right? Or 8, 9, 10 months ahead of time, as opposed to 1 month before the upgrade, literally. So by doing that, you get in a position where actually a lot of the people that you might end up in some kind of death struggle with, that leads to a split, everybody's actually pretty reasonable when you're much earlier in the process, and things can be discussed, and things aren't set in stone yet. And I think one of the examples of this is the group proposal and tokens and the current discussions about induction proofs and so forth. Though these really special upgrades that are under consideration, they touch a lot of things. They touch all kinds of parts of consensus and transactions and the ecosystem and the economic implications of Bitcoin Cash and so forth. So they have naturally needed more time. And it's been amazing to see the process where there's just so much more interaction. It's much more constructive and positive. Everybody knows that there's like this kind of competition for the best ideas, as opposed to, well, it's already been set in stone. So now it's whether I'm going to die on a hill and split, right? So I think it's been amazing to see that it's actually working. Like it really is working and surfacing all these issues and reducing the amount of conflict, the amount of destructive conflict, right? Like it's more constructive criticism and constructive conflict. I love to see it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So
please go ahead.
So I can actually fill in some detail that actually hasn't been mentioned yet, but I'd like to point it out. So
Sure.
the ship process itself, it's also not something that is dictated or set in stone. And it was proposed as a chip following kind of its own terms. And it's actually upon all of us who are in this ecosystem to agree to follow those rules or not agree to follow those rules. So we really ought to look at, are the outcomes that created this way valuable, and should we be doing this? And so that was one of the things we had in mind when we set out to do the first actual consensus affecting chips. We wanted to make sure that we ended up in a situation where we kind of showcase to others that, yes, if you do it in this way, you will actually have less conflict. You will actually have more agreement and more well thought out and reviewed changes. So that is kind of a nice point.
I can also say that the way that things are happening is one way that a dictator could, demand that things happen, is what we're doing right now. The dictator could very easily say, like, no, look, you got to follow the chip process, right? A dictator could say that. So it's just one of those things where whatever the reality is, our history is such that, we had to face the dictator multiple times, right, in the history of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, and then now we're you put away the crutch, and you got to make it on your own without the crutch of the dictator. And I think we're doing a pretty good job so far. And I think chip process could probably improve, perhaps, but it's doing quite well.
Thank you very much. I agree. It seems like we're in uncharted waters here, as far as how things are developed and decided. And I personally think it's very much in line with the spirit of what Bitcoin is supposed to be. Thank you, everyone, for the history and in-depth information about how chip works. Moving on to chips that have actually been agreed upon and will be going live in a couple months. I'd like to talk to Jason a little bit about the two chips that have already been approved, and what are they, what will they do, and please let everyone know what we can expect in May.
Awesome. So two chips so far, and the May upgrade includes one chip is the increasing the maximum integer size that's available to the Bitcoin Cash virtual machine. So a pretty detailed technical thing. Then there's also another a much larger set of introspection opcodes, so operations that can be used by contracts to inspect information about the transaction that is spending them. So you can, from a contract, check and see what the output amounts are on a particular transaction, or what inputs look like, lock time, version, things like that. And so the net effect is for the math chip, for the math and larger integer chip, we are able to write contracts that can deal with much larger balances of BCH. We were still dealing with 32-bit integers up until now in BCH's contract system, which prevented us from dealing with amounts of BCH larger than 21 BCH. And even smaller amounts if you're talking about various other kinds of hedging contracts that any hedge guys can talk to at length. That is a major improvement for a lot of contract authors, because you're no longer having to work around the 32-bit limitation, which ultimately prevented a lot of important use cases. And then the introspection one is probably the one I'm most excited about. That allows us, so introspection is the idea of the word introspection is to from the contract look at details about the transaction that holds the contract. So it is a little bit hard to get your head around, but it's being able to write a contract that sets specific conditions on how it gets spent. So it's not just that you need to sign with a particular key, like contracts have worked in the past. You can also have a contract that says you need to sign with this key, but also you can only take out 10% or something. And also you need to submit a withdrawal request 7 days in advance, which can be canceled. So things like that allow us to build some of the really important like financial security wallet vault systems that are critical for the existing for significant financial institutions to hold Bitcoin Cash and use Bitcoin Cash with large groups of people. So the existing banking world already has access to a lot of already has developed over the course of thousands of years, various protocols for having multiple people sign off on various things, having different people present when things are transferred, having a specific protocol for how the armored truck moves between banks, having a protocol for how you approve transactions of a certain size, and do you need to get the bank manager involved if the transaction is larger than this size? Do you need some sort of delayed system where first you need to tell the bank 7 days in advance, and then you can make that transaction on the day you're ready to make it? And all of these strategies are ways of thwarting, theft attempts, thwarting issues where a single breach loses the entire sum of money, right? Right now, most of the cryptocurrency space has money locked up in wallets that can be swept in one fell swoop. That's including most exchanges. Some massive amount of it's more than 90% of all crypto assets are secured by a single key. If you look across all of the chains, and the numbers are not that much better on chains that support multi-sig vaults already. And by having some of these introspection opcodes, we can start to build really meaningfully secure vault systems that work for average users, to protect them from things like being held up on the street. If you're held up on the street, they've got a gun. If everybody in the entire Bitcoin Cash space has a wallet that literally cannot be withdrawn from at greater than some certain amount, without a 7-day waiting period, then you're dealing with a very different kind of mugging than one that can be thwarted by a delayed withdrawal. So there's all sorts of institutional implications where institutions can start to manage Bitcoin Cash in ways that institutions really expect to be able to manage their money. And then there's just basic security implications for Bitcoin Cash users. Like if we can get the entire space using wallets that are this level of secure, it actually makes physical security better for a lot of Bitcoin Cash people. So that is, like, I would say, the immediate impact of the May upgrade. The longer term impact is there are even more significant applications for introspection, which gets much more complicated. But ultimately, a lot of the things you see in other cryptocurrencies that have more open-ended contracting systems, like Ethereum and things like that. Decentralized exchanges, prediction markets, synthetic assets, transferable synthetic assets, things like that. Many of those are certainly becoming possible in May and are much closer to being very efficient in future upgrades. So this gets us very, very close to what we need for much larger decentralized applications and coordination systems.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And also thank you for providing some real world examples there that I think us people with smaller brains can more easily latch on to and understand. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think, sorry, Jonathan, you have a hand up here.
I'd like to throw in one more example. So
Please.
Most people here have heard of Flipstarter. And Flipstarter has a bunch of trade-offs in its construction. And with the upgrade coming in May, there are now people working on a contract-based Flipstarter implementation, which would not require a separate plugin to pledge to, and will not have the same minimum same high minimums as the current flip starter has. And that will be a very interesting development. And would probably not have been possible without this. It's a space constraint, and the native introspection kind of makes this a possibility.
I'd also like to add one more to that.
Sure.
There's an article in the Telegram group that General Protocols wrote that describes, you know, the benefits specifically for our application, for one of our applications, and but one of those is even that, generally speaking, the introspection just makes smart contract development on Bitcoin Cash much more accessible to developers and much more safe for developers. When you're working at the extreme low level of any digital system, it's very easy to make mistakes. So introspection just removes a whole huge class of things that you might screw up by trying to do that yourself, and makes more accessible and safer as well.
Excellent, thank you. Am I also correct in understanding that part of bigger script integers means that you can do multiplication as well, as opposed to doing hacky solutions of 2 + 2 + 2 + 2 + 2 + 2 + 2, that sort of thing? Is that correct?
Yeah. The multiplication opcode was the only one that was not re-enabled. Was one of the ones that was not re-enabled in the larger upgrade in 2018, in part because overflow handling wasn't figured out, and that was really pending this larger integers upgrade. So once we figured out how to get integers larger than 32-bit, then it made sense to add opmul, so that they fit together very well, and so are part of the same chip.
Excellent. That is great news. And if I'm correct, that is also part of what is necessary for smartBCH to upgrade. Jonathan has a comment, please.
Yeah, so can you imagine coming to an ecosystem and you want to make this cool smart contract, and you can't do multiplication, and your contract can't know what money you are spending or how much it is or whom you're sending it to. And while you're writing your contract, you have to fit in this teeny tiny space, and the only way to get access to the data you need is to spend about 50% of it on a hacky workaround that requires very in-depth technical knowledge and is really kind of, you can pull it off in ways that are security implication bad. Like, you can fail at pulling it off in a way that can lose people money. Imagine as a developer coming into an ecosystem that looks like that and thinking that you're going to make like a good product for your users.
And to follow on to that, why is it still like that? While, for example, EVM has done different things and kind of moved ahead so far, I think the most direct answer to why are we still here when we should have done all this stuff, you know, back in 2016, why didn't all this stuff happen? And it's exactly that stability and social consensus question. When things are all up in the air, what are you going to work on? Who's going to invest resources in it? So stability is just incredibly important to all of these things moving ahead.
Like before,
and predictability.
Yeah.
If you are going to start working on something, but you don't know if the requirements for your tool is going to be there in the end or not, why would you spend like millions of dollars building a product if you don't know if the product is going to be launched in the end? Because someone else might say, no, we're kind of scared of this and we don't want to do this upgrade. And so having the chip process where you're supposed to see miles ahead what's about to happen, and in fact, the end of every ship is like half a year of do nothing. That half a year is so that people in the space can actually like get prepared and start with confidence to build on what's about to come.
Thank you. You had something imaginary?
I just want to say, like, before our recent, more spelled out and more orderly chip process, like, I was pretty involved in the BCH years prior. There has been two direct opposite classes of problems. One I mentioned just now, oh, we have this big thing, and then it was like sprung on the network in the last minute, and then people have to scramble. There's also the opposite class of problem. It happened more than one time where, the dictator just say, oh, shit, we need something to justify our upcoming upgrade. Let's throw something in there. And then we got some, and then there's something thrown in there. And then people were like, wait a second, why exactly are we doing it? Oh, well, it's not that significant. Let's just go with it. That also happened. So yes, having a more orderly process where you can see things coming from a mile away very slowly and taking inputs, it to a large extent it fixes all this. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I would like to move on. Dr. Wang, could you please tell us about what's coming for smartBCH and how the May upgrade is going to help you develop what it is you're working on? Sorry, you're muted.
I am grateful for the chip process because the two upgrades, the bigger script integers and the native introspection codes, both of them are very, very helpful for us to build a decentralized token bridge between BCH main chain and the smartBCH sidechain. Actually, we tried many times in the last year using the traditional covenants implemented with CAS script, but we found a lot of headaches. the 32-bit integers are not enough, and the OP code and the byte count are very, very large. We need a lot of OP code. And with the native introspection, we can reduce the byte count and the OP code dramatically. So we can put a lot of logic. The traditional UTXO-based chains such as BTC and Dodge, you can build a bridge using some signatures, but you cannot implement a very complex voting scheme, especially when you want to make the miners to vote for something. It's very, very difficult to implement such features on these UTXO chains. But with the native introspection, finally we can implement such a function. Actually, I was not a good main chain UTXO developer. I spent a lot of time last year to learn how to write script on smartBCH main chain. But when I finally got familiar with the mechanism to write scripts, I found the two chips which will be upgraded in May is very, very important for the development of SHA-Gate. I know that the infrastructure is just one part of the cross-chain bridge. The last year there are a lot of coins get stolen from all kinds of cross-chain bridges. So we also want to make more enhancement or security patches to the original proposal of SHA-Gate. I put the original SHA-Gate proposal about 5 or 6 months ago, but after that, since we have got these two upgrades and we have studied other mechanism to enhance security, we will get a new proposal of the SHA-Gate. So we will spend a few more months to implement to get a new proposal and implement the SHA-Gate. And we promise it will be a decentralized and secure solution for every BCH holder to transfer their coins smoothly between the main chain and the side chain. And we'd like to introduce one new feature, which is named enclave. You may heard that Intel has a new technology about 6 years ago named SGX, Software Guard Extension, and now Azure has allow us to have a whole full node client running inside the enclave. And before this year, we cannot have a large enough cloud instance to run a full node client inside the enclave. But in this year, we are able to put the full node client of smartBCH inside the enclave, which will enhance the security level about the Stargate cross-chain bridge. So we will write a new proposal to integrate this new technology, and we will implement the Stargate using the main chain script. We believe that by combining the machine level enclave security and the voting scheme enabled by the native introspection, we will have a much better solution. We hope this solution can be done in the next 4 or 5 months. So many people asked me, oh, when can we get the Stargate working? After the main chain upgrade, will the side chain be ready? I said, no, sorry, we still get some other things done, because only the upgrade of OP-code is not enough for a perfect cross-chain bridge. So we'd like to use some more months to implement it.
So am I right in hearing that Stargate is not going to be coming directly after the May upgrade? Do you have any kind of idea how long it will take to implement and release Stargate?
We still need 4 or 5 months. And then in summer, before September, we will be ready for the Stargate.
Thank you very much. Is there any other upgrades that are coming to smartBCH in the next few months?
Yes, we will first have a consensus upgrade to enable home voting, which will make smartBCH really a real POS and POW hybrid consensus algorithm. It will happen very soon. We are still finalize some of the X-Hedge smart contract, because maybe we could also vote with the X-Hedge smart contract both for the validators and for the Stargate operators. We are still finalizing the scheme. When we have decided all the details, we will start the hard fork of the smartBCH. You know, the Amber testnet has been hard forked successfully, and we will soon see more validators coming to the Amber testnet. And when we finish the hard fork upgrade of the smartBCH main chain, smartBCH mainnet, we will get a lot of new POS validators, and some parties can talked with us and show their interest.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? No? All right. In that case, I would like to move on to an open discussion about possible future upgrades, things that are in motion, chips that have already been started, or perhaps not even started yet. I know Jason is working on group and various other things. Yeah, please feel free to jump in. What is being worked on?
But things that are of interest, I'd say for me, there's a few proposals that I put up last year that will be, I think, more relevant this year, that are not urgent but are important. So one is targeting the virtual machine limits more precisely. Right now, the Bitcoin Cash virtual machine is has limits on the number of operations that can be used, but they're very arbitrary. They don't have any real connection to the amount to the resources that are actually used in validating a transaction. So when you look at it, most operations are hundreds of thousands or millions of times faster than the worst operations. So in practice, the only operations that actually matter for preventing abuse of the system is making sure those really expensive operations aren't excessively used. So there's a few things like that are just like kind of almost housekeeping things that we need to think about with how the virtual machine limits work. That we can actually just tune those limits properly, such that the virtual machine has the exact same resource requirements, but we can do significantly more. So being able to have stack items up to the size of the script. So rather than 520 bytes, be 10,000 bytes to support larger pre-images for hashing. And then opcodes, having no meaningful limit for opcodes, because opcodes are a silly thing to limit. Instead, you limit hashing, and you limit it to the maximum theoretical amount of hashing that is currently possible. So anyways, that is one direction that I think we need to be investigating this year. There's still more research to be done on it. I put up the proposal last year, and I think it will probably be relevant for things like sidechain bridges, where we're having to eke out pretty important logic in under 201 opcodes right now. Probably possible for many constructions, but there are also a large class of decentralized oracles in the academic literature that are not implementable on Bitcoin Cash unless we handle those limits better. So that's one, and then there's another one also for looping, which is a very similar thing, where we have this impression that loops should not be possible because loops can be infinite, and it's kind of like this knee-jerk misunderstanding of how the system actually works. There's nothing, a loop in the context of the Bitcoin Cash virtual machine is basically just a way of compressing a massive amount of opcodes into just a few. So if you're actually targeting the virtual machine limits properly, then there's not really a meaningful difference between whether or not you have loops or don't have loops. But it's been almost like this talking point of how BTC people, or so how Bitcoin people have identified themselves differently than other cryptocurrencies. Like, oh yeah, the virtual machine just doesn't have loops. That's why it's different. That's not actually why it's different. It's different because it's massively parallelizable. It doesn't have to be single threaded and ordered, every transaction ordered by the miners one at a time. But anyways, so those are two kind of, in a sense. So the loops would allow for some very significantly more efficient contracts, much smaller transaction sizes, and implementing some sidechain bridges and decentralized applications that are very difficult to do right now. And then I'd say the third one that's on the radar is I just put together a specification for cash tokens v2. The group and PMV3 and several of the other kind of token related proposals, I think, are starting to come together a little bit. It's probably material for a future discussion. But a lot of the people that are currently working on tokens, I think we're converging on a solution now that should that should be really possible in the next year. So if I were to make a bet, I'd say there's a better than 50% chance that we'll be able to have native tokens on Bitcoin Cash in 2023. There's some theoretical things that I feel like we've made some breakthrough on just the underlying theory of how tokens relate to the Bitcoin Cash virtual machine, which is important. And then there's been a lot of standardization kind of work that's happened over the past year, where we have really beaten out every possible argument that needs to be discussed in this topic. So it does seem like that is something that will kind of coalesce in the next few months. We'll see by May. We'll know if there's a spec that's really likely to that is ready for a decision in November, I would say, or if it's something that needs to be kicked another year. But that would be a big breakthrough. A proposal making it through for the token system stuff would be a huge breakthrough. That would be putting Bitcoin Cash's contract system really on par with any of the global state ones like Ethereum, where you can build the same sort of decentralized applications, except in Bitcoin Cash's case, they're actually significantly more performant, because you're not waiting for every single transaction on every decentralized application on the entire network to be ordered one by one by the miners. It works like all other, like Bitcoin Cash's UTXOs currently work, where you can validate thousands of transactions per second on a commodity hardware. It's 25,000 transactions per second on in testing from from the year 2020. So I'm not even sure what that number would be this year. Somebody needs to run that again. But yeah, so there's some really some very, very cool decentralized application implications of token stuff, and that's not even including kind of the basic stuff you get with on-chain tokens. You get stocks issued as tokens, so you can have shareholders in a corporation where they hold their shares in a wallet. Dividends are distributed to current shareholders, etc. There's loyalty points, tickets, like tickets for events that are transferable and holdable in wallets, gift cards and store credit. There's a lot of things like that that are actually just kind of external off-chain use cases of tokens that would be very, very valuable for the Bitcoin Cash space. So those are very exciting. In addition to the kind of more out there decentralized finance things.
Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead.
That also speaks to as Jason was saying, that's one of the huge reasons that BCH is such an important chain, is the scalability and the parallelizability of everything and the operations on it. And that scaling question is another interesting one for the upcoming future, right? Is all right, so let's make sure the scaling thing stays on track and keeps going. I'm not sure if Uname wants to talk about it, but he has been doing some work here.
So I'm going to keep it brief. So so both of these proposals are on their very early stages, and we have no guarantees. We have no guarantees whether they are going to make it this cycle. They might very well not, but they exist, and there are people making serious looks and working on them. So one of them is the long-term, the long-term solution to the block size problem, which is a slowly adaptive block size that is basically based on the median of past n blocks. So without going into too much detail, that proposal basically, takes a very large sample. It depends on the final parameters. It could be weeks. It can even be months, and then take the median block size from that, and which should correspond roughly to the quote unquote demand of block space, and then run that through an algorithm, and then we can then use that to decide what kind of maximum block size do we want. So the advantage of that, the advantage of such a system, as opposed to direct one-time upgrades that's pushed from cycle to cycle, is that we no longer have to face the social cost of having to decide every time, what kind of maximum block size do we actually want. We can and aside from eliminating the social cost, we can also see such increases coming from a mile away and have everyone prepare for that. So this is in the same spirit as the chip process. We want things to happen orderly and without disruption, so that the chain is reliable for everyone to use. So the other upgrade upgrade proposal actually came from Bitcoin Verde, who has made this very interesting implementation of elliptical elliptical curve based accumulator that ended up with a UTXO commitment. So for those who are not as technical, the UTXO commitment is basically a device where the miners commit to a certain snapshot of the blockchain every so often. And because there are such commitments, if you want to sync the blockchain to a point where you can run wallets or run a miner or whatever on the node, you don't have to start from scratch, which is a burden. You can start from a much more recent commitment, and then you just snap your finger, and then I think on Ethereum that's called warp. That's called like warp sync or something like that. You can snap your finger, and then in a couple of minutes you are synced. And so that is a very, very important. That is some very, very important work that enables long-term massive scaling, which has been a goal of BCH since the very beginning. So yeah, both of these are being worked on. I can make no guarantee on their status, but they are there, and we have not forgotten scaling. So.
And just to reinforce that, those snapshots that he's talking about, that's entirely proof of work based. There's no shenanigans going on there.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Jason mentioned that November, the discussion of some chips might be prepared by November. So I assume that means November is the hard date for upgrades to be accepted for the 1 year schedule. So why have a 1 year schedule versus doing immediate upgrades? Everybody agrees this idea is amazing, so let's just do it tomorrow. Why not just do it tomorrow?
Should I jump in? Okay. So this was actually before the chip process, Bitcoin Cash kind of have an ABC imposed sort of 6 month schedule. So the 6 month schedule come with a bunch of drawbacks. So one of them is not really about the 6 month schedule itself. It was about the complete lack of a process, which resulted in a closed door dictatorship. But aside from that, there is also the other complaint, which is that first, a 6 month consensus upgrade places a lot of undue burden on our businesses. exchanges simply don't like to, especially the more exchanges with more rigorous procedures in terms of software validation and then testing and so on, like Coinbase. They really don't like to be put through this mandatory cycles all that often, and it makes people question the stability of your network. And the other thing is that while people have made speculations about how a 6-month schedule can work, even in terms of development cycles, in reality, what actually happens is that activity in terms of proposals simply don't heat up and attract a lot of attention until after the last cycle was done and activated on the network. And then people say, okay, that was good. And then let's move our attention to the next batch of things. That is, in reality, is what happens. And there is simply not enough time for the whole process in terms of attracting attention, getting agreement, and then getting implemented. And then when it's implemented, getting all the application developers to try it out. There was simply not enough time for all this to play out. So on the other hand, some people argue that, okay, so let's just do it whenever we want, and then that reverts back to the need for an orderly schedule so that people can follow the process. And then there are even some proposals like, okay, you want stability, right? Let's extend it to 2 years. Let's extend it to 5 years. Let's follow the U.S. presidential elections. So those are obviously kind of extreme. And then you look at how fast cryptocurrency works. That is also not workable. So in the end, 1 year is convenient and easy to remember, but it is not a magic number. It is not something that that is a dictation from heavens, like this is the perfect number, but rather it was a compromise between several different extremes and it sort of meets everyone's needs. Nobody will be perfectly happy with that, but it's okay. It's in an okay place. So that's where the 1 year comes in.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything they would like to add about possible future upgrades? Of course, smartBCH is welcome as well. Do you have anything you'd like to share about possible future upgrades for smartBCH? Sorry, you're muted again.
Yes, we do have a few more upgrades on the predefined smart contract. We can implement VRF and some minor improvements about the SEP and the SEP proposals. But if you are not a developer, I guess maybe you are not you are not interested. It's not facing the final users, facing to the final users.
Thank.
And in the next year, we are focusing on some compatibility because we heard that some people want to use the Etherscans API instead of the Web3 API, which is a RESTful API, and it is not open sourced. So since last year we have done most of the performance related work, in this year we will focus more on the compatibility and make the developers feel more comfortable. So there is not some most significant and amazing improvements. We just make it smooth and easy to use.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.
Thank you. If anybody else has anything they'd like to add, feel free. Otherwise, we'll move on to questions.
I just want to reinforce that this whole process that we've been talking about is not a developer process. It's a network process. So, when there's good ideas, that there's absolutely no requirement that they come from or be driven by or be owned by a developer. at some point, developers are definitely necessary, right? Because it's just naturally a software system at the base of it. But yeah, this is a network process. So I'd like for everyone to be involved, and would love for people to take a look at chips and read the motivations and read the costs and the cost benefit analysis, and who what stakeholders are interested. And maybe you realize, wait a minute, I'm a stakeholder in this. Actually, this is really important to me, or to my business, or to my idea, or to whatever it is that I'm working on. It would be fantastic to have more participation. So check out the chips. You can see those on bch.info/chips, or on bitcoincashresearch.org.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are a network. We are a whole community of people, and people have different strengths and different weaknesses. A developer who's very technically minded perhaps is not so good at doing research in excuse me, in the community for stakeholders, or who to contact, etc. So by all means, if you believe you can offer assistance to a developer who has a good idea but perhaps is not so good at communicating with businesses, then feel free to contact them and step up and offer your help, and vice versa. Excellent. If there are no other comments or things that people would like to talk about as far as the future, then we'll move on to audience questions. There are not so many. First question, will smartBCH adopt BCH's chip model? It doesn't seem like there is a process, a documented process for its evolution yet. That's for you, Dr. Wang.
We'd like to use a more mature process such as chip to add new features to smartBCH. But currently, there is only one implementation of smartBCH. Some people had told me they are interested to develop another implementation. The multiple client is very important for decentralization. So we'd like to have multiple implementations, and we'd like to have a more mature process to add new features. Even without these things, currently we are still trying to document every modification to the consensus change of smartBCH. But it turns out a few people read the documents, and few of them are interested. So maybe we have more users and more developers join the smartBCH ecosystem. We will switch to a more mature process. But currently, since only we are developing the source code, we will still keep the current developer circle. And yes, and you can see that I am the dictator in this space of smartBCH, but we do like to switch to a more decentralized way if people want to join us. That's all. That's it.
Thank you very much. A question from the audience. I may have missed it, but is the pre-validation for zero comps being worked out more?
Is that is that in reference?
They're talking about pre-consensus type stuff, or
got it.
Weak blocks or avalanche and all those kind of things.
So the short answer is that it is not currently very active. The long answer is that there are several things on the table, including but not limited to various proposals from a while ago, such as Avalanche, which would probably require its own source of security budget, and then there is also BU's proposal that does not, but will require some more complex algorithm work. So those proposals exist, but as far as I can tell, they are not being actively worked on. There is also the consensus-free proposal that is from Jason right here, that is based on putting up an escrow. So that has more complexity, but it does if you can get over that hump of getting adoption for those complexities, it can be very secure. So yeah, there are things out there. Yes.
Thank you very much. They specified in the chat 0 proof. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not, but
yeah, there is also double spend proof, which is being deployed and in use on the field right now. And double spend proof has the advantage of being minimal complexity to implement and use. It is usable right now and active on the and has been active on the BCH network, and at least 2 known businesses are using it to provide convenience to people every single day. They being hop.cash and localcryptos.com. I encourage people to make use of these services and enjoy fast service. So yeah.
There's also the cash register that Verde made. I think it was Verde who made it. So it's like a web implementation of the idea of Bitcoin Cash Register. It's also using it.
thank you very much. Another question. How does the chip process deal with bad actors? No comments. Okay.
Is that directed at us, any single person?
I think you'd probably be the best. I could say something, but you'll say it more concisely and clearly. Anyway,
so to put it very briefly, the entire idea of the chip process is based on it being orderly, transparent, and you can see it coming from a mile away, and you need to widely consult the ecosystem. So in doing all this, it leaves very little room for bad actors, or simply the very broadly defined bad actors. Some people might actually want to harm BCH, and others might simply be reckless people who don't care about the ecosystem and simply have a big ego and want their stuff in regardless of its effects on other people. So the process, some people complain that, it is slow. It imposes a lot of burden on me. I don't have time. My time is valuable. I don't want to go through this process. I have to ask a lot of people. That is a complete waste of energy. But it is precisely this slow rolling, transparent, and time and energy consuming process that, as it goes on, it basically leaves very, very, very little room, I would say, for bad actors who, if they decide to go through this process, then whatever they're doing would either become good in the process, or it will be widely known that, this proposal is no good. So
and that comes back to the point I was making before, that a lot of the people that at some point in the past may have been identified by some as bad actors, they really might not have been. There absolutely have been bad actors in the history of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, but there's a lot of them who probably were not. And like Uname said, they with a more structured process and the realization that this is significantly a social problem, a lot of those people would have just ended up, converging on really good solutions and good ideas and things that really do work well.
Thank you very much. Another question: for simulated state type contracts, are there approaches that can be taken to parallelize these kinds of contracts? For example, so that we don't have to follow a single chain of inputs.
I can speak to that. If you're curious, I wrote quite a bit about that in the multi-threaded covenants section of the cache tokens chip. So I describe a lot of the constructions that are described in that section, and I maybe can put a link in somewhere. A lot of the constructions that are described in that section are actually currently possible. It's just that the token, the cache token stuff makes them a little bit easier to do. So it is possible to make, already possible, I believe in several ways, to make covenants that have multiple child covenants that people can interact with in public. And with the cache tokens proposal, it would be a practically unlimited number of child covenants that you could interact with. So that you can, for example, submit orders to a decentralized exchange, which then aggregates the orders on some period and conducts one giant auction style trade where everybody gets their trade in on the same tick. So that there are lots of kind of multi-threading strategies to make covenants work really well, where users can interact with kind of any of the available space of interface child covenants, and the top level application can accept input in parallel from thousands of users at the same time. There's more detail in the cache tokens chip, I would say.
Thank you very much. For further detail, please follow the links. Yes. They say Josh, but is Jonathan Tooman still involved in the scalability of BCH?
I can say something to that. So yeah, Jonathan. He I think he has said in the past that he had some other things that he wants to work on, but I also see him popping up every once in a while in conversations. I suspect, I don't speak for him at all, but I suspect, he's kind of like special operations super brain. And if an interesting problem comes up and, in scaling or other areas, I bet he'll get involved again at some point. Because he's still here, he's still around, he's still talking. It's just that he's not directly driving anything.
Thank you very much. It looks like that is it for questions in the chat. Does anyone have any final comments, some closing remarks they'd like to make?
There's no dictator anymore. So if you want something to happen, if there's something important that you think needs to happen, there's on the chip process form, like there's a template for the chip, and there's a section there called owner, right? That's serious, right? If there's something that you think is very important, you're gonna have to do it yourself. Find somebody to work with, find some other people who agree with you, and do it yourself. There's nobody to throw things at and expect them to do it for you. So go for it.
I'd like to add to that a bit. This is something that Cheap Lightning has been saying a lot, even in other channels. And this is not just limited to the chip process. This extends to basically everything in Bitcoin Cash and beyond, which is that if you want something to happen, somebody has to drive that thing. You don't necessarily need to be a developer. You don't necessarily need to have a lot of money. You don't need to be especially eloquent or anything like that. But you need to first have a pretty good idea what you want. And second, this is the most important thing, you need to take ownership of that thing and drive it to success and completion. That is very important. A lot of people think that, oh, I have this idea, I throw it out there, and then magically, poof, it happens. It happens, and yay, that is my idea. No, that's not how it happens. That's not how it happens. Ideas are a dime a dozen, but the ones that are driven to completion are the ones that matters. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll add further that you should expect that you're gonna have to be persistent, and even if you don't get all the way, you will have laid some foundation, and someone else might take it up. I'll give some examples. So the native introspection that is coming this May, it wasn't started by me, and it wasn't entirely driven by me. Like I picked up pieces. I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. People have done a lot of the work before me, and I just helped it get to completion. And I also want to give some kudos and respect to a guy who calls himself Bitcoin Cash Artist for his tremendous persistence in bringing tokens and induction proofs oriented ships forward, despite so many reviews that it's effective like version 8 now. He's still at it, and as part of that work, he's bringing up things and new viewpoints and getting information out there that will eventually be like things that needed to happen for us to converge on a ultimately good solution. And so don't be afraid of starting, and don't be afraid of being stubborn and persistent and reaching out over and over again. Just do as much as you can, and it will take us forward.
Thank you. I cannot agree more. As Imaginary said, this is a topic I'm quite passionate about myself. If you believe your idea is fantastic, then convince everyone else your idea is fantastic. And if it is fantastic, we will understand, and you will see beautiful flowers bloom. It looks like that is it for questions. If there's not anything else, then I will call it a do.
I'd like to close with a quote that I got recently from someone that I respect. Would that be all right if I close with that, at least for myself?
Yes, sure.
All right. So this is something written about Flipstarter, but I think this really applies to Bitcoin Cash as a whole. So forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's a fair assumption. And this is a quote from Mike Hearn. So OGs probably know who that is. So Mike Hearn, I reached out to him recently, and he shared a quote with me for the Flipstarter project. And again, I think this applies to all of BCH. So let me just go ahead and read that. He said, "It's fantastic, amazing, and humbling to see how the Flipstarter community is methodically making decentralized crowdfunding real. When I started down this road with Lighthouse years ago, the Flipstarter community is what I imagined and hoped it would eventually look like. The cryptocurrency world, sadly, has many projects that are hype over substance. But I believe that when the history of this time is written, it'll be the projects like Flipstarter that left the biggest long-term impact." And again, I think it's fair to apply that to Bitcoin Cash as well.
Beautifully well said. I'm not sure if you're out there listening, but thank you, Mike Hearn. That means a lot to us who've been around for a while. And I couldn't agree more. Bitcoin Cash is, working in that spirit. And I'd love to thank all of you for helping build this amazing Thank you, everyone, for helping to build this amazing project. Helping to build this amazing community. And I appreciate all of you, your time, your effort. It's really, really wonderful and inspiring to see. On that note, I will call this meeting as finished. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our Telegram group to stay updated about future Bitcoin Cash network discussions. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
And we are no longer live.